The projection screen still glowed with my findings when they all stood in unison. 12 executives, their faces contorted with a mixture of anger and disdain, pushed back their chairs simultaneously, as if orchestrated. My voice died mid-sentence about the alarming quality failures I had uncovered. "We are done listening to your theories, Vance," the CO, Julian Prescott, announced to the room. His voice carried that particular timbre of someone who believed himself untouchable. "This presentation is a waste of valuable time." The rustle of expensive suits filled the room as they gathered their tablets and notebooks. No one looked at me. No one spoke. The methodical way they ignored my presence felt calculated to maximize the humiliation. "The numbers speak for themselves," I said, struggling to maintain composure. "Our customers are perfectly satisfied," interrupted Diana Thorne, the VP of Operations. Her smile never wavered as she added, "Perhaps you should consider whether you are suited for this level of responsibility." They moved toward the exit in a tight cluster. The sound of their Italian leather shoes against the floor seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. 12 executives, the entire leadership team, walking out while I stood there, hands still raised toward the data that showed indisputable evidence of their negligence. Roland Sinclair, the CFO, was the last to leave. He paused at the doorway, his hand hovering near the light switch. "Don't bother finishing. No one will read your report." He flicked the lights off, leaving me in semi-darkness, illuminated only by my damning presentation. 30 seconds passed in that dimmed room. My heartbeat slowed from racing panic to something steadier, colder. The betrayal crystallized into something harder, something actionable. I had anticipated this reaction, had practically counted on it. The public rejection was merely confirmation of everything I had suspected for months. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a number I had saved weeks ago, but hoped I would not need to use. Pressed call. When she answered, I spoke 7 words that would change everything. "They did exactly what you said they would." "All of them?" asked the voice on the other end. "Every single one, and it is all recorded." A pause. "Give me 4 hours." I ended the call and sat back in my chair, staring at the data still projected on the screen. The quality failures, the cover-ups, the altered test results. Everything they did not want anyone to see. My name is Arthur Vance. Until 3 months ago, I was the Quality Assurance Director at Apex Medical Instruments, one of the country's leading industrial and medical equipment manufacturers. Our products, especially our flagship ICU ventilators, were in hospitals, schools, and government facilities nationwide. The kind of equipment people trusted with their safety without a second thought. I was 55 years old, and I was not always the person who made powerful enemies. Growing up in a small industrial town in Ohio, I learned early that systems had flaws, but honesty mattered. My father worked 30 years at the local boiler plant, coming home with stories about corners cut and warnings ignored. When the plant closed after a preventable steam explosion that killed 3 of his coworkers, I promised myself I would never stay silent if lives were at risk. My reputation in the industry was built on thoroughness. I fixed broken systems without damaging the companies I worked for. I was known as someone who found solutions, not someone who created problems. That is why they recruited me. "We need someone with your integrity," Julian Prescott had said during my final interview, his smile warm and convincing. "Minor inefficiencies have crept into our processes. Fresh eyes, that is all we need." My predecessor, Walter Higgins, had left suddenly. Health issues, they claimed. His team seemed oddly reluctant to discuss him. When I asked about his documentation, I received vague responses about his unique filing system that had not been properly transferred before his departure. The first warning sign came during my facility tour. Sarah Jenkins, a quality technician with 8 years at the company, showed me around with mechanical precision. Her answers felt rehearsed until we reached the testing lab. When I asked about their validation protocols, her eyes darted toward a small security camera in the corner before answering. "We follow established company procedures," she said, her voice tight. Later that week, I found testing results that did not match the manufacturing outputs. Equipment that failed critical safety checks was being shipped with approval signatures. When I brought this to my team, they stared at their hands, silent and afraid. "Just follow established protocols." Julian instructed when I requested a private meeting. Previous leadership complicated things unnecessarily. The next day, a bonus notification appeared in my company account, $15,000, substantially more than my contracted amount. No explanation was provided. I declined the bonus, transferring it back to the corporate account and continued investigating. The patterns became clear. Our flagship medical equipment line had critical safety flaws that were being deliberately concealed. Testing protocols had been modified to hide defects. Customer complaints were being redirected and buried. The issue is not with the product, Diana Thorne explained when I presented my initial findings privately. It is with user expectations. Every industry has acceptable margins of error. Not when those errors could harm patients in ICU beds, I countered. She slid a folder across her desk. Inside was a revised employment contract with a substantial salary increase of $45,000 and an unusual confidentiality clause. Everyone benefits from regulatory flexibility, she said, tapping the signature line. We reward team players generously. I took the contract, told her I would consider it, and continued gathering evidence. That night, I received an anonymous email with previous safety reports, ones that had been altered in our official records. The sender's message was simple. Walter Higgins was not sick. The morning of my presentation to the executive team, I found Sarah Jenkins waiting by my car in the parking garage. "They are setting you up," she whispered, constantly checking over her shoulder. "They have told everyone your report is an attention-seeking exaggeration. Julian already has your termination paperwork prepared." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Walter Higgins tried to do the right thing, too." Her voice cracked slightly. "He did not deserve what happened to him." She walked away before I could ask more, but something in her eyes, the same haunted look I had seen in my entire team, solidified my decision. I made one crucial modification to my presentation before the meeting, removing one slide that contained the most damning evidence, saving it for another purpose. Now, as the hum of the cooling fan in the projector filled the silent room, I knew there was no going back. The trap was set. After the executives abandoned the meeting room, I sat alone in the semi-darkness. The call I made was not to a journalist or a corporate lawyer. It was to Karen Miller, the lead investigator at the Office of Inspector General overseeing healthcare manufacturing, someone who had been quietly building a federal case for months. "I sent you everything from today," I told Karen when she answered. The walkout was almost exactly as we predicted, and they made those comments about the Cincinnati incident on record? Her voice was measured, professional. "Yes," I replied. Roland Sinclair specifically mentioned handling it like Cincinnati when discussing the suppressed incident reports on the ventilator valves. "Perfect. That connects the dots we needed." Keys clicked in the background. "Stay where you are for now. Act normal if anyone returns." I gathered my materials slowly, methodically. The humiliation that should have crushed me had instead hardened into something dangerous, certainty. For 3 months, I had been building a case while they thought they were breaking me down. The first time I contacted Karen was not planned. I had found her name buried in correspondence my predecessor had hidden in encrypted files. Walter Higgins had not left for health reasons. He had been systematically documenting the same issues I had discovered. His final report had vanished the same day as his sudden departure. When I first reached out to Karen, she was cautious. Walter stopped responding to my inquiries. 3 months ago, she had explained. The company claimed he was unavailable due to medical leave. "He is not sick," I told her. "At least not according to his wife, who I tracked down last month. She says he took a massive settlement with a gag order after they threatened him with fabricated fraud charges. Our collaboration began that night. We knew a frontal assault would not work. The executives had covered their tracks too carefully, with armies of corporate attorneys ready to bury any accusation. We needed them to incriminate themselves, preferably on record." After leaving the meeting room, I walked through the empty halls to my office. The silence felt weighted now, expectant. I checked my watch, 2 hours until Karen's team would make their move. My office door was ajar. Inside, sitting in my chair with his feet on my desk, was Jared Prescott. Behind him stood Diana Thorne, her arms crossed. "That was quite a spectacle, Vance," Jared said, tossing a pen onto the desk. "Though not surprising given your rigid approach." I set my materials down carefully on the side table. "Was there something else you wanted to say that you could not share with the group, Julian?" I asked, addressing Diana directly, ignoring the young man. Diana smiled, that particular smile that never showed teeth. "You know, Arthur, I actually argued for hiring you. Your reputation for fixing problems impressed me. But you misunderstood your assignment from the beginning, which was to fix the perception problem, not to create a new one." She stood, smoothing her skirt. Your position has been terminated, effective immediately. Security will collect you in 20 minutes. Whatever materials you have gathered stay here, including my personal notes, I asked. Everything, Jared chimed in, standing up and smirking. The company owns all work product created during your employment. Your company laptop stays on this desk, and your access badge is deactivated. I understand, I nodded solemnly. Something in my calm acceptance made Diana suspicious. She stepped closer. This is not a negotiation, Arthur. You have made enemies of people who do not forget. People with influence across the entire industry. Is that a threat? I asked. It is reality, Diana said. Your career ended the moment you decided to go against this team. Principles are not much compared to 12 executives' unanimous opinion, I said. She paused at the doorway, looking back. Exactly. No one will believe your word against ours. After they left, I sat at my desk and opened my bottom drawer. Behind the false back panel was a small digital device that had been recording every conversation in my office for the past 10 weeks. I slipped it into my pocket just as my phone buzzed with a text from Karen. We are ahead of schedule. 4 agents arriving now. Meet in lobby in 10. I gathered my personal items, just enough to appear compliant without raising suspicion. As I walked through the department, my team watched with expressions ranging from pity to fear. Some knew what was coming. Others thought they were witnessing my final departure in disgrace. Sarah Jenkins caught up with me near the elevator. They are saying you tried to blame production for design flaws, she whispered, her voice trembling. Julian is already announcing Jared as your replacement. They are they? I pressed the down button. Interesting timing. What will you do? She asked. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Sometimes, I said, stepping inside, you have to let people believe they have won before they realize they have lost. The lobby was bustling with afternoon activity. When the glass door swung open, 4 individuals in dark suits entered, led by Karen Miller herself. Her badge was already visible as she approached the security desk. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General, she announced, her voice carrying across the marble flooring. We have a federal warrant to access specific company records and conduct interviews. The security guard looked panicked, reaching for his phone. Within minutes, the lobby transformed into carefully controlled chaos. Employees stopped to watch. Phones came out. Someone from the legal department rushed down, demanding to see paperwork. I stood near the reception desk, observing as Karen handed over documents and explained the situation with clinical precision. Her team dispersed toward the elevators, accompanied by thoroughly unsettled legal representatives. Julian Prescott appeared from the executive elevator, red-faced and shouting instructions to a junior attorney who looked increasingly alarmed. When Julian spotted me, his expression transformed from anger to calculating suspicion. He strode over, positioning himself to block my view of the proceedings. I hope you understand what you have done, he said quietly. This little tantrum will destroy more than just your career. That sounds concerning, I replied. Maybe you should share those thoughts with the agents upstairs. His face tightened. You signed confidentiality agreements. Anything I shared was provided through proper regulatory channels. I finished for him. Nothing outside federal compliance. The color drained from his face as he processed the implication. I had not leaked anything to the press. I had simply followed mandatory federal reporting protocols they had been circumventing for 3 years. You have no idea what forces you are playing with, he said, his voice low. This company has survived worse than one disgruntled employee. I smiled, maintaining eye contact. I am not disgruntled, Julian. I am doing exactly what you hired me to do, ensuring quality standards are met. Security will escort you out now, Julian said. Actually, said a voice behind him, Mr. Vance will be staying to assist our investigation. Karen stood there, her badge prominently displayed. We have some questions about the presentation that was interrupted earlier today. The next 4 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Federal agents moved through the building securing servers and documentation. Executives were isolated for interviews. Employees watched wide-eyed as 3 years of careful deception began unraveling in real time. I sat in the conference room, answering questions and providing context as Karen's team built their case. At 4:30, Roland Sinclair, our CFO, was escorted from his office, ashen-faced and silent. By 5:15, 8 more executives followed, clearly no longer in control. As they passed the conference room where I sat, Julian locked eyes with me. Understanding that the man they had dismissed as incompetent had systematically dismantled their entire operation was almost worth the anxiety of the past 3 months. But this was only the beginning. What none of them knew yet was that tomorrow morning their carefully constructed house of cards would completely collapse. The evidence secured today was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and I would be there to witness the final blow. The next morning arrived with the surreal brightness that follows life-altering events. I dressed methodically, charcoal gray suit, minimal jewelry, and a tie that sat straight. Today was not about making a personal impression. It was about watching accountability unfold. Sleep had evaded me, but adrenaline provided perfect clarity. 3 months of careful documentation, strategic alliances, and deliberate patience were about to culminate in this emergency board meeting. The company headquarters looked different in the early morning light, vulnerable somehow. Security had been increased with unfamiliar guards checking IDs at every entrance. News vans waited at the perimeter of the property, held back by temporary barriers. A young woman I did not recognize greeted me at the executive entrance. "I am Zoe, assistant to the board chair," she said. "You are expected upstairs." The executive floor was eerily quiet. Glass offices that usually bustled with activity stood empty, their occupants notably absent. Computer screens displayed login pages that would never again welcome their usual users. Zoe led me to a side room adjacent to the main boardroom. Through a partially open door, I could see people gathering. Somber faces, urgent whispers, water glasses no one touched. "Wait here," Zoe instructed. "The chair will call you in when they are ready." Alone, I checked my phone. A message from Karen Miller, second phase proceeding now. 9 search warrants being executed simultaneously at private residences. I smiled. The net was closing, and those inside this building had no idea how wide it stretched. From the boardroom, voices grew louder. Someone was demanding answers. Another was insisting on immediate legal representation. A third voice, firm and authoritative, cut through the chaos. "This meeting will come to order," announced Lawrence Whitfield, the board chair. "We face unprecedented allegations that require immediate action." The door swung open. Lawrence, a silver-haired man with calculating eyes, nodded at me. "Please join us, Mr. Vance." The boardroom contained 23 people, the full 12-person board, several senior executives who had not been at my presentation yesterday, and a cluster of grave-faced corporate attorneys. The 3 empty chairs at the table were conspicuous. For those who have not met him, this is Arthur Vance, our quality assurance director, Lawrence said, or rather, our former director, according to termination papers that were apparently filed yesterday afternoon by Julian Prescott. "Papers I never approved." Murmurs rippled across the room. Lawrence continued, "Arthur has agreed to present his findings directly to this board before speaking with federal investigators later today." Julian Prescott, who sat rigid near the far end, interrupted. "This is highly irregular. Our external counsel should review any materials before you allow a terminated employee to present unverified claims." "You forfeited that privilege, Julian." Lawrence cut in sharply. "The federal regulators have already seized our primary servers. We are trying to understand what is happening before the stock market opens and this company loses half its value." He nodded toward me. "The floor is yours, Arthur." I connected my tablet to the presentation system. The room darkened, and the large screens illuminated with the same slides I had begun showing yesterday. As I started explaining yesterday, before the executive team departed, I began, my voice steady. "Our quality assurance protocols have been systematically compromised for approximately 36 months. Specifically, our flagship ICU ventilators, which represent 40% of our annual revenue, have been manufactured and shipped in direct violation of FDA Quality System Regulation 21 CFR Part 820. I clicked to the next slide. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically laid out the technical specifications of the failure. I showed testing data proving that the pressure release valves on our ventilators failed under continuous high-pressure cycles. This was not a minor calibration error. It was a critical design flaw. I presented internal documentation proving that these valve failures had already resulted in 3 separate incidents where ICU patients suffered severe lung barotrauma at major hospitals. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock, then to barely contained fury. "This cannot be accurate," Diana Thorne insisted, her voice tight as she tried to salvage her position. "These are isolated incidents being presented without context. Every manufacturing process has acceptable margins of deviation. Not when those deviations violate federal law and injure patients, I replied calmly. And these are far from isolated. I switched to a new slide, showing a series of safety validation reports from the past 2 years. Every single one of these reports showed a passing grade, yet the raw calibration data in our database showed clear failures. The board members leaned forward, studying the digital signatures on the approvals. You see, I continued, pointing to the signature line at the bottom of the screen. These quality approvals were signed off by the QA Deputy Director, Jared Prescott, but they were signed using the digital key of my predecessor, Walter Higgins, months after Walter had already left the company. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Julian Prescott sat frozen, his hands suspended over his glass of water. His face drained of color as he looked from the screen to me, then down the table. This is not just a regulatory compliance issue, I said, looking directly at the board's legal counsel. This is forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. Because these safety approvals were forged to secure multi-million-dollar supply contracts with federal VA hospitals, every single one of those contracts is void ab initio. Invalid from the very beginning. The company is now facing active fraud claims under the False Claims Act, and the federal government has the right to claw back every penny we have received. Julian Prescott finally found his voice, though it was strained and high-pitched. That is a lie. My son would never bypass protocols. You are fabricating these logs to protect yourself after your termination. I did not answer him. Instead, I clicked to the next slide, which contained the encrypted system logs showing the exact IP address and workstation from which the forged signatures were uploaded. It was Julian Prescott's private home office network. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Directors were shouting over one another, attorneys were whispering frantically, and Lawrence Whitfield simply leaned back in his chair, staring at Julian with cold, calculated disgust. I stood at the podium, watching the storm rage, knowing that the most devastating blow was still to come. As the noise in the boardroom reached a fever pitch, I waited for Lawrence Whitfield to restore order. He hammered his pen on the mahogany table until the room fell silent again. Once the directors quieted down, I clicked my tablet to transition to the next slide. What I am about to show you, I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet room, explains why this quality deviation was permitted to continue. The screen displayed a complex financial flow chart. It mapped a series of payments originating from our corporate accounts, routing through shell companies in Delaware, and ending in offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary names on those offshore accounts were clear: Julian Prescott, Diana Thorne, and Roland Sinclair. These payments, I explained, were directly linked to monthly shipment volumes. The higher the number of ICU ventilators shipped, the larger the deposits into these offshore accounts. To ensure these volumes remained high, quality failures had to be ignored. If the ventilators failed testing, the shipments stopped and the offshore payouts dried up. Roland Sinclair stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a private financial matter that has nothing to do with quality assurance. Where did you get access to these banking records? This is corporate espionage. These records were not obtained through espionage, Roland, I replied. They were compiled by my predecessor, Walter Higgins. Before you forced him out, he spent months tracing these transactions. He knew he was being targeted, so he created a secured backup of these files on an external server. I looked at the board members. Walter was forced to sign a separation agreement with a strict gag order after Julian threatened to prosecute him for manufactured fraud charges. But Walter was smart. He set up a digital dead man's switch. If he did not log into a secure email server once every 30 days to reset a digital timer, these files were programmed to be sent automatically to the Office of Inspector General and to whoever held the QA Director position. I received my access key during my 3rd week on the job. Diana Thorne leaned forward, her face pale but her eyes blazing. Even if Walter compiled this, it is the word of a disgruntled former employee. You cannot prove we knowingly shipped defective units based on financial records. I smiled slightly. I was hoping you would say that, Diana. I clicked to the next slide, which was an audio player. I pressed play, the speakers in the boardroom filled with the crystal-clear audio recording from our meeting yesterday. Julian Prescott's voice was unmistakable. We are done listening to your theories, Vance. This presentation is a waste of valuable time. Then came Diana Thorne's voice. Perhaps you should consider whether you are suited for this level of responsibility. Finally, The recording captured Roland Sinclair's voice as he paused at the doorway. "Don't bother finishing. No one will read your report. Just handle it like we did in Cincinnati." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Lawrence Whitfield leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "What is the Cincinnati incident?" he asked, looking from Roland Sinclair to me. "Last year," I explained, "an ICU patient at a hospital in Cincinnati died when our ventilator valve seized. The company's internal engineering report proved that the valve was the root cause of the death. But instead of reporting this to the FDA, Julian, Diana, and Roland suppressed the engineering file. They blamed the hospital staff, claiming it was user error. They paid a quiet $2 million settlement to the patient's family to keep them quiet, and they kept selling the defective valves. That is why federal agents are not just at our headquarters today," I continued. "As we speak, Special Agent Karen Miller's team is executing federal search warrants at the private residences of Julian, Diana, and Roland. They are specifically looking for the personal laptops and external drives where the original Cincinnati engineering files were moved after being deleted from our corporate servers." Roland Sinclair sank back into his chair, his jaw slack. Diana Thorne stared at the table, her hands trembling. Julian Prescott looked toward the corporate attorneys, but the lead counsel was already packing his briefcase, shaking his head. "Mr. Prescott, Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Sinclair," the lead attorney said, his voice devoid of warmth. "As the company's legal representatives, we must advise you to stop speaking immediately. We also advise you to leave this room and contact your personal defense attorneys. The company's legal team can no longer represent your individual interests in this matter." Julian Prescott stood up slowly, looking older than his 58 years. He did not look at me. He did not look at his son, Jared, who sat frozen in the corner. He walked toward the exit, followed by Diana and Roland. The remaining board members watched them leave in complete, stunned silence. Once the door clicked shut, Lawrence Whitfield turned back to me. "Thank you, Arthur. Please step out for a moment while the board convenes an executive session to vote on immediate suspensions and corporate restructuring." I disconnected my tablet and walked out into the quiet hallway. Knowing that the final chapter of Apex Medical Instruments was about to be written, I sat in the quiet hallway outside the boardroom for nearly 2 hours. The occasional sound of muffled arguments would leak through the heavy double doors, followed by periods of intense silence. Employees on the executive floor moved about on tiptoe, their eyes darting toward the boardroom and then down to me. I was the man who had just dismantled their leadership team, yet I felt a profound sense of calm. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the doors finally opened. Lawrence Whitfield stepped out and signaled for me to return. The boardroom looked exhausted. The attorneys had left, and the remaining directors sat with loosened ties and piles of scribbled notes. Lawrence walked back to his seat at the head of the table. "The board has voted unanimously," Lawrence announced. "Julian Prescott, Diana Thorne, and Roland Sinclair have been suspended from all duties, effective immediately. We are cooperating fully with Agent Karen Miller's team, and our internal audit committee will begin a complete review of all QA records." He paused, looking at me with a mixture of respect and caution. "The board also voted to suspend Jared Prescott, pending a full investigation into the forged quality reports. We owe you a debt, Arthur. You prevented this company from shipping even more defective ventilators." "I did not do it for the board, Lawrence," I replied. "I did it for the patients who were hooked up to those machines, trusting them with their lives." Lawrence nodded slowly. "We want you to stay. The board is prepared to offer you the position of Interim Vice President of Quality Assurance, with a mandate to rebuild the entire department from scratch. You will have a direct line to this board and complete authority over validation protocols." "It is a generous offer," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a single envelope, "but I must decline. My resignation is in this envelope, effective tomorrow morning." Lawrence looked surprised. "Why?" "You won. You have the authority you wanted." I smiled. "I did not do this to climb the corporate ladder, Lawrence. My work here is finished. I documented the corruption, I secured the evidence, and I delivered it to the federal authorities. Rebuilding this company is your responsibility. Mine was to stop the harm." The next morning arrived with a media storm. I watched the news coverage from the quiet of my apartment, drinking coffee. The reports were detailing the federal raid on Apex Medical Instruments. The company's stock had dropped 42% at the opening bell. Trading was temporarily suspended as market analysts predicted a complete restructuring. The news anchor showed footage of Julian Prescott, Diana Thorne, and Roland Sinclair being escorted from their homes by federal agents. 9 executives had resigned by noon, and federal prosecutors announced preliminary charges of conspiracy, mail fraud, and manufacturing violations against 7 former leaders. What the public did not know, what no one except Walter Higgins, Agent Karen Miller, and I understood, was that this had never been about simple revenge for my public humiliation. It was about justice. Justice for the patients harmed in Cincinnati, for the employees threatened into silence like Walter, and for the technicians like Sarah Jenkins, who were forced to choose between their livelihoods and their ethics. The true revenge was not the criminal charges or the ruined reputations, satisfying as those were. The true revenge was that moment when 12 powerful people had simultaneously revealed their character by walking out of my presentation. They believed their unified front made them invincible, never suspecting that their synchronized abandonment was the final piece of evidence we needed to prove a conspiracy. They thought they were demonstrating their absolute power. Instead, they were sealing their fate. My phone rang. A number I did not recognize. I pressed accept. "Is this Arthur Vance?" asked an unfamiliar voice. "It is," I replied. "This is Dr. Harrington at Memorial Hospital," the caller said. "We have been following the news about the federal investigation at Apex Medical Instruments. Our Medical Safety Board is looking to establish an independent quality audit committee to help us identify and remove compromised equipment from our facilities. Given your background and what you did, we would like to discuss a consulting position. Would you be interested?" I smiled, looking out the window at the city skyline. "Very much so, Doctor. Sometimes the best revenge is not watching your enemies fall. It is using their destruction to build something better and safer upon the ruins they left behind. If you have made it to the end of this journey with me, I cannot thank you enough for listening. The courage to stand up against powerful forces often comes from knowing others understand your story. Please consider hitting that like button if this resonated with you, and subscribe for more true accounts of corporate justice. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. There is strength in our shared stories. Until next time, remember that no amount of power can withstand the weight of truth when it finally breaks free.